Okay, welcome back. I am going to cover chapter 2 of the 363 code and go over some of the big points that are in that chapter. And I'm going to do this for each chapter. And we'll start with chapter 2. This has to do with the mark of the red hourglass on a black widow spider. So let's take a look at, for some of you who don't know what that looks like, let's take a look at that. So let me share my screen. I'm going to pull this up so we can take a look at what this would look like. And so let me kind of got it stretched a little bit. So put this in here and I can just maybe magnify it a little bit. Okay, so the top, you can kind of see that. This is the black widow spider. It's a female red hourglass on the abdomen, 8 legs. This is kind of blown up and you can see the hourglass a little bit better. It doesn't come with the numbers. Obviously, the numbers are what I added back when I was mapping and working with Nikola Tesla's vortex mathematics. And I was doubling and halving numbers and reducing them down to a single digit. No one had really added the 369 to any kind of diagram. So I actually worked it back into this particular form, which actually looks like the Great Pyramid. If you pull up this little point here and you pull it up and it forms the apex of the Great Pyramid. So I'll go into more detail. This is really fascinating when you look at these numbers and the significance of these numbers and how it relates to geometric shapes, also energy flow, the etheric lattice, the grid, the crystalline grid, also the crystal spiral. All of this with the breath of the universe is sitting in this symbol on the spider. So I'll get more into that as we go a little bit further. I want to just kind of do an outline of this chapter so I can help people understand what's in the chapter. And so it starts off large when the very beginning explaining black widow spiders and that hourglass. And I worked on spiders. I've worked on black widow spiders for over 20 years. And I spent a lot of my time and energy trying to understand the proteins that are in the fibers, how many different fiber types do spiders spin, and how many different biofactories are in their abdomen, and what's the biochemistry as far as how does the liquid get converted into a solid. It turns out there's a lot of hoses that lead from the biofactories that manufacture the proteins, and they're pushed into these hoses as a liquid crystal, and they are then water's removed and they're pushed out the hoses where they exit the exterior on the spinneret. And what we found was that there were 7 different fiber types. And these different fiber types, we tested them using mechanical testing, and they have different mechanical properties as far as their strength and elasticity, toughness. And these are very important properties for material scientists. And we wanted to know, like, why are there these different, properties that are tuned to nature? What was causing this? And it turns out that it's the protein sequences, the architecture, when you get down to it. So we did a lot of protein sequencing. We hunted down these spider silk genes. We sequenced them so we could have a better understanding of the entire protein sequence. And then we took those genetic blueprints and put them into bacteria to express the spider silk proteins, we purified them, and then using some techniques that took us a couple of years to develop in the laboratory, we spun the purified bacterial proteins into synthetic silk fibers. We tested them, and of course, they're not as good as nature's. Big surprise there, huh? And so we kept working on that. We were still working on aspects of that I kept looking at this red hourglass when we were doing micro dissections, trying to understand the anatomy and some of the biochemistry of the spider silk extrusion process. So we kept looking at this. I kept looking at the hourglass and what is it doing there? It's most people say, oh, it's a fear symbol, and stay away from those spiders. Don't touch them. In the news, like it would say, you'll if you're bit, you could die. And so there's this big hype that was created to not really focus much on what's two triangles. One is inverted, and you have a second triangle, and there's a constriction point. Looks like an hourglass. The red color, this is on a female, and red's associated with the root chakra, also blood, birth, time. And so this thing's just sitting there, and I kept just wondering and wondering what it was doing there. And so I got really interested in Nikola Tesla's work, and I've mentioned kind of that he was a genius scientist, and Tesla was one of the most profound scientists, especially with respect to electromagnetism. And so I kept looking at it, and it had my attention. So I ventured out and tried to get more information on electromagnetism. I started with some of the traditional physics and moved into a couple of other areas. I looked at some of Ken Wheeler's work. He's kind of an independent scientist, but an expert, from my opinion, on magnetism. And he wrote a book about like unlocking the mysteries of magnetism. And I think he's one of the best individuals that has a grasp of the understanding how magnetism works. And I also looked at some of the work from Charles Protas Steinmetz, which he worked closely with Tesla. And he was also a genius, and especially working on motors. And he did some work with Einstein as well. There's pictures of him and Einstein, and very close work with Tesla. And there's some diagrams that he generated that are just very important diagrams as far as explaining electromagnetism. So I'm going to share some, at least one of those diagrams with you, and show you that you can also see the actual similarity in the cross section of a tree trunk, which always got to keep your eye on nature. I had nice conversations too with Isaac Rodriguez. He's an expert in sidereal astrology and also ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. And we discussed the spider and the hourglass. And he pointed me into a direction of looking at Neith, which is, she's one of the most ancient goddesses in the pantheon. And there's a story that she spent some time with the spiders, and they taught her how to weave. And I think the story is about basically spiders are like weavers of time, and how the magnetism comes out, and how it returns as the dielectric, and which is really the breath of the universe. But once you have motion, you have time. And so I think this is the connection to Neith. But anyway, let me pull up, see if I can pull up a couple diagrams. So let me do this. Go back here and pull this up. go to this slide here. Okay, so these are a few images taken from the book. I just kind of cropped them. And I wanted just to show you a couple of things. This is the obvious cross section of the tree. I think you can see there are concentric circles, and then there are these radials that come off. And in biology, you're kind of taught you can tell the age of the tree by the rings. This is a wire over here, conductor, and this is a sketch that Steinmetz made when he was explaining electromagnetism. The concentric radial lines represent the magnetic field, and they're associated with pressure. And then you see these radial lines here, and these radial lines are the dielectric, and you can see that they terminate at the pole here, and they're considered to be like teeny elastics and can kind of pull back here. So this is an incredibly important diagram, and when you're trying to explain some of the mechanics behind electromagnetism. Okay, so let's continue on kind of with some of the chapter content. So I got really, deeper into understanding aspects of physics. Looking at the hourglass, there's that constriction point. The constriction point represents the singularity. And the singularity is, if we were to describe it, at least from my perspective, there's no time. And the singularity, that point that looks like constriction, there's no geometry, there's no time, there's no space. So the Cartesian coordinate system is out of there. It's full potential. There's memory, coherency, and this is how I would describe it. And there's singularities in space, if you would look, and this comes from Buckminster Fuller's work, like almost every point in space you could have like a singularity. What we do know about space, singularity, energy, is that in invisible space there's vast amounts of energy. And that hourglass that you see has many different meanings. That hourglass represents the breadth of the universe. There is an exhale representing the number 6. There is an inhale, which is represented by the number 3, and a pause, which is 9. That hourglass also represents the etheric lattice. And I'm going to show you that, and you're going to be, wow, when I show it to you, you'll be just, I think, blown away of how the divine stuck the etheric lattice and how the universe breathes. And it's all in this red hourglass. And so we'll be talking about that as we move through. And there's, of course, a couple triangles. There's one inverted triangle connected to another, which forms the hourglass. The hourglass, when you look at black widow spiders, this red hourglass, the color too. The color represents the root chakra, could represent blood, birth. And so this color has profound significance. The triangles, I can't, like Buckminster Fuller basically was saying that you look at the polygons, it's the most important polygon. It's the most stable structure that the universe does. And so you see this. I'll cover more about the triangle, because that's another big one. And the tetrahedron, when we get into making the tetrahedron out of 4 triangles, or it actually could be made out of 2, as Buckminster Fuller demonstrated as well. And I'll show you how that can give rise to the Merkaba. And so also when we talk about the singularity, we will be talking about 0 point energy, because it's linked to 0 point energy, of course, and we have to be able to talk about that. So the language, nature is using a specific language, and that language is in geometry, in harmonics, you can say sound, and this is how nature proportions, ratios, symmetry. This is how she communicates. And so as we go a little bit further in the chapter, this chapter really is trying to get you to see the relationship the first time of this hourglass and how we can model the actual geometry and the flow of energy back onto a structure. Also, the structure, you'll see it has connections to the Great Pyramid in Egypt as well. The connection here too will go back into these ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, and I'll be looking at that as we go deeper into the book. So these are the main points that are in chapter 2. And always with the chapters, when I end the chapter, I have some pause and anchor key concepts that are present. And I try to go over the most central ideas that are presented. And so always focus on the back of the chapter. I will say a couple of things about that singularity, a couple of more things, is that the singularity, sometimes in traditional physics right now, they mention the void, empty space. And from my perspective, this invisible space is loaded with energy, and it has a specialized geometry associated with it that makes it seem like there's nothing there. But in reality, it's chock full of energy. And therefore, if you understand the etheric lattice and you know how to interface with it, you can pick up you can make three-dimensional structures that have the geometry, the angles, the dimensions that will match or resonate with that in the invisible space. You can literally have life force come to you, and life force is the energy that runs the universe, that spins the galaxies. So this concept of the void is really the most potent field of all. A still point of memory and coherence. And so we'll talk more about that as we go further. Okay, so I'm going to do the wrap. Look for the next video as we get further in. There'll be more geometry, more numbers, and it's going to get super exciting as we go further.